Hi guys, so I'm back with a second video. I wasn't sure if I would be, but I found it really helpful yesterday, so I thought I would create another video. I watched yesterday's video back before I put it up, and then I watched it again this morning. I don't like watching myself, but I thought it was a good idea. And I noticed quite a few ums and ahs, and I could definitely see I was talking quite quickly, and that my anxiety, I could just see it a bit. Whereas today, I mean, I'm still umming a bit, but I think I definitely feel calmer. I did some more meditation this morning, and my sister's actually came back last night. She's been in London, and she was really umming and ahhing over whether to return, whether to come back, or how long could she stay away for. But she came back last night, and she's just been kind of self-isolating in her room, but I've seen her but at a distance, but that's been really nice to catch up with her and to have her back as well. And yeah, I've had some really nice conversations with my mum and dad as well, and we're just kind of keeping each other's spirits up, and work have been really supportive. So I work for the National Trust. This video is in no way affiliated with them, this is all just my own back, and there's been some really good conversations there, so that's kind of going well, and I just feel a bit more calm today. And I think yesterday also as well, I was feeling a bit overwhelmed, and the idea of, I know it sounds a bit ridiculous, but the idea of putting on makeup as well and doing, I mean, not that I don't think with my hair today, it just looks, I went in the bath and it got a bit wet and it looks slightly, well, I think it looks slightly better, it's got a bit more volume to it, but I didn't really do anything to it, and I thought I'd put some makeup on. So yeah, today's I'm feeling a bit better. I hope you're all kind of staying safe, taking care of yourself. Yeah, and I'm just to say as well, please message me if you want. I'm on Instagram as well as Hannah_Squire, so do get in contact if you want someone to chat with, because that'd be really cool. Yeah, so on to this video, back to Ethel Lina White and to the Lady Vanishes. So as you notice, I have a tripod of sorts today, so I'm hands-free. I've basically taken my laundry basket, put some books on top of it, and my phone is rested against an Art Deco photo frame. So we'll see how this goes. Also, once again, I don't know how to edit, so this is just start to finish, no edits in it. It's probably better for 4 edits, but never mind, this is how it's going to be. So as you notice, this bookcase wasn't here yesterday. It usually sits on my bedside table, but I thought I'd bring it over to show you a few more of my Ethel Lina White and of my other books, and this is obviously the bookcase you saw yesterday. If you haven't watched the first video, it might be a good idea to watch that one first before you watch this one. Don't have to, but it things might make a bit more sense. So yeah, so on this bookshelf I have, so these are my Ethel Lina Whites. I have a Virginia Woolf Hogarth Press, a few Agatha Christie's actually, and then these really lovely Wardlock & Co. Who I mentioned Wardlock & Co. published some of Ethel Lina White's book as well. So some really lovely early travel guides which I got. So I got ones of places that mean something to me. So this is Sidmouth, which is where my grandparents used to live, so I used to visit quite a lot in the summer, so I thought I'd get the Sidmouth edition. And I've got Tenby and Dartmouth as well. These Agatha Christie's, I was actually given them. It actually made me really emotional, and sort of, I tried to stop myself bursting into tears. Mark, I work for the National Trust. I used to work at a place called Whittick Manor in Wolverhampton. If you've never been, check it out. It's beautiful. It's an amazing place. And Mark has the most amazing collection of art and books and furniture. Has a really lovely eye, and we'd a few times talked about writers and musicians and artists, and when I was leaving as kind of a present, he also gave me a really lovely Al Bowley record as well, so very generous of him. He gave me these 4 I think they're all first editions actually, yeah, of Agatha Christie, with their dust jackets, which was amazing. And my favourite cover is The Labour of Hercules. How cute does he look? So yeah, really beautiful. And that's one that says a star in Hercule Poirot. That's the back if you want to see the crime cut back. So yeah, so I've got some Agatha Christie's, and these are some more of my Ethel Lina White. My favourite of these, the front cover, is 'Twill Soon Be Dark, which, look how beautiful that is. I just think it's such a beautiful cover. Just, oh, the figures are amazing. And then on the back, I really love this as well, just this simple diamond design. That's the spine as well, if you wanted to have a look. And then I can show you as well. I don't know if you'll be interested in this, but I thought I'd show you one of the insides of the book, show you the type, just because I think it's really beautiful. So yeah, I like the inside of them. So that's some more of the Ethel Lina Whites that I have. And I realised yesterday that I could show you in a bit more detail the Wheel Spin. So the Wheel Spins is the original title that was given to Lady Vanishes. I will call it the Lady Vanishes from here on in, just because it's easier for everyone, me included. But yeah, so this is the original. This is not a first edition, this is a second edition. So this was reprinted again in 1936, showing how popular it was. And with this lovely front cover with the train wheel on it. Spine again, and then this is the back. So I showed you this yesterday, this really lovely photograph of Ethel Lina White. And I haven't found a biography of her. There is a bit of information online, but not that much. So it's lovely to be able to kind of see her face. And I'd love to kind of do a bit more research into her and find out about this author that I love. She's described on the back as the new Edgar Allan Poe. I read some Edgar Allan Poe when I was a teenager, but I've not read any in years, so I probably need to go back and read it and just compare the two. And then at the bottom there's a couple of reviews of a few of her other books. So Wax and The First Time He Died, which I can just quickly show if you want. I won't show you all these books, we could do another video about that. But yeah, so this is Wax, which has a really creepy, sinister cover, which I really like. So that's Wax. How lovely is that? There's just the arms are just incredible. And that, oh, the back's actually really lovely as well. So that's Wax. And then The First Time He Died, I don't think I have. No, that's one I don't have the hardback yet, but I do have this really beautiful early Collins paperback, which pink is my favourite colour, and this shade of pink, as you can probably tell from my hair, is just gorgeous. Like, oh, I just love that shade of pink. So that's the cover. And I love, so the back of some of these paperbacks have adverts of various things. How cool is that? So this is for Julicia, keeps your hair in uniform smartness and health. Buy a flask today and be convinced that Julissima is the tonic cream of hairdressings. So yeah, really beautiful edition. But we're obviously here to talk about Lady Vanishes. Oh, just to say as well about this book. So on the inside cover, it's got a bit more information about the novel, and then what's really nice is in the back it's called A Calendar of Remarkable Successes for the Crime Club they've published in this year. So if I show it to you, so it's got January, the ABC Murders by Agatha Christie, and then it's April, The Wheel Spins came out, so The Lady Vanishes comes out. Which, to think about those two books coming out in the same year, was just an incredible year for crime fiction. And then they also mentioned, so there's Freeman Wills Croft's novel, The Loss of the Jane Vosper, sounds intriguing, Nicholas Blake's Thou Shell of Death, and Below the Clock by J.V. Turner. So those are writers I know nothing about, but maybe I should actually look them up and check them out. So yeah, so this is the hardback second edition from 1936, but I'm going to be reading from the paperback again. I realise as well, I have, just because I love The Lady Vanishes so much, I have a film still in a frame, a print, just above my bed, which I was potentially going to show you today, despite how messy my room is. You can see the good part, the rest of it is, yeah, a bit of a mess. But I realise it's quite a big plot spoiler, so I won't show you the photograph till, if I finish reading the book, I can show it to you then. I know some of you have probably already watched the film, or will watch the film, or read the book, but I thought it best not to just plot spoil when we only just read the first chapter. So yep, so back to The Lady Vanishes. I picked this up on eBay as well. And it's just, yeah, it's just such a beautiful edition. I know I mentioned this all yesterday. So let's dive straight into chapter 2, shall we? And I believe it's called The Threat, yes. Fabulous name. Okay, right. Some 4 hours later, Iris lay spread-eagled on a slope of the mountain, high above the valley. Ever since she left the chill twilight of the gorge at a shrine which marked a union of paths, she had been climbing steadily upwards by a steep zigzag track. After she'd emerged from the belt of shadow, the sun had beat fiercely through her, but she did not slacken her pace. The fury of her thoughts drove her on, for she could not dislodge Olga from her mind. The name was like a burr on her brain. Olga. Olga had eaten her bread in the form of toast, for the sake of her figure, and had refused her salt owing to a dietetic fad. This had made trouble in the kitchen. Olga had used her telephone and misused her car. Olga had borrowed her fur coat and had lent her a superfluous husband. At the memory of Olga's Oscar, Iris put on a sprint. As if I'd skid for a man who looks like Mickey Mouse, she raged. She was out of breath when at last she threw herself down on the turf and decided to call it a day. The mountain which had challenged her kept withdrawing as she advanced, so she had to give up her intention to reach the top. As she lay with her eyes almost closed, listening to the ping of the breeze, her serenity returned. A clump of harebells standing out against the skyline seemed hardened and magnified to a metallic belfry, while she herself was dwarfed and welded into the earth, part of it like the pebbles and the roots. In imagination she could almost hear the pumping of a giant heart underneath her head. The moment passed, for she began to think of Olga again. This time, however, she viewed her from a different standpoint, for the altitude had produced the unusual illusion of superiority. She reminded herself that the valley was 4,000 feet above sea level, while she had mounted about 5,000 feet. On the basis of this calculation, she could afford to be generous, since she was 9,000 feet taller than her former friend, assuming, of course, that Olga was obliging enough as to remain at sea level. She decided to wash out the memory as unworthy of further anger. But never again, she said. After this, I'll never help anyone again. Her voice had the passionate fervour of one who dedicates herself to some service. With the virtuous feeling of having profited by a lesson for which heavy fees had been paid, she smoked a cigarette before the return journey. The air was so clear that mountains she had never seen before quivered out of invisibility and floated in the sky in mauve transparencies. Far below she could see an arm of the lake, no longer green but dimmed by distance to a misted blue. Reluctantly she rose to her feet. It was time to go. The descent proved not only monotonous but painful, for the continual backward jolt of her weight through a strain of unexercised muscles. Her calves began to ache and her toes were stubbed on the stony path. Growing impatient, she decided to desert the zigzag in favour of a direct shortcut down the face of the mountain. With the lake as a guide to direction, she hurled herself down the slope. It was a bold venture, but almost immediately she found that the gradient was too steep. As she was going too quickly to stop, her only course was to drop down to a sitting posture and glissade over the slippery turf, trusting to luck. From that moment things happened quickly. Her pace increased every second in spite of her efforts to break with her feet. Patches of blue and green sped past her as the valley rushed up to meet her and smashed into the sky. Bumping over the rough ground, she steered towards a belt of trees at the bottom in the hope that they might save her from a complete spill. Unfortunately, they proved to be rotten from age, and she crashed through them to land with a bump in the middle of the stony pass. Her fall had been partially broken, but she felt very sore and shaken as she scrambled to her feet. In spite of her injury, she did not forget to give the forced laugh which had been drilled into her at school as the accompaniment to any game's casualty. Rather amusing, she murmured, picking splinters out of her legs. But she was pleased to notice the shrine a few yards further up the track, for this was a definite tribute to her steering. As she was not far from the hotel, she clattered down the gully, thinking of the comforts which awaited her. A long cold drink, a hot bath, dinner in bed. When she caught sight of a gleam of water at the bend of the gorge, in her eagerness she broke into a limping run. She rounded the corner and then stopped, staring before her in utter bewilderment. All the familiar landmarks had disappeared, as though some interfering person had passed an Indian rubber over the landscape. There were no little wooden houses, no railway stations, no pier, no hotel. With a pang of dismay she realised that she had steered by a faulty compass. This was not their familiar green lake in which she and her friends had bathed daily. Instead of being deep and ovoid in shape, it was a winding pale blue mere, with shallow rushy margins. Just another aside, I completely can understand Iris. I get lost really easily. I think last year I got very lost on the moors in Yorkshire for about 4 hours by myself, so I completely appreciate how she's feeling. Anyway, carrying on. In the circumstances, there was but one thing to do. Retrace her steps back to the shrine and follow the other gully. It was definitely amusing, and she reached quite a creditable laugh before she began to plod slowly upwards again. Her mood was too bleak for her to appreciate the savage grandeur of the scenery. It was a scene of stark desolation, riven by landslips and piled high with shattered rocks. There was no crop of vegetation amid the boulders, no chirp of bird. The only sounds were the rattle of loose stones dislodged by her feet and the splash of a shrunken torrent which foamed over its half-dried course like a tangled white thread. Used to perpetual company, Iris began to long for faces and voices. In her loneliness, she was ever reduced to the flabbiness of self-pity. She reminded herself that, when she returned to England, she would not go home like others. She would merely go back. At present, she was living at a hotel, for she had sublet her small luxury flat. Although her mode of living was her own choice, at such a time and such a place, she felt that she paid a high price for freedom. Her mood did not last, for at the top of the pass she was faced with a call upon her fortitude. Casting about to pick up her bearings, she made the discovery that the shrine was different from the original landmark, where she had struck the mountain zigzag. This time she did not laugh, for she felt that humour could be carried too far. Instead, she was furious with herself. She believed that she knew these mountains because with the others she had clattered up and down the gorges like a pack of wild goats, but she had merely followed while others led. Among the crowd was the inevitable leader, the youth with the map. Thrown on her own resources, she had not the least idea of her direction. All she could do was to follow the gorge up to its next ramification and trust to luck. If I keep on walking, I must get somewhere, she argued. Besides, no one can get lost who has a tongue. She had need of her stoicism, for she had grown desperately weary, in addition to the handicap of a sore heel. When at last she reached a branch which gave her a choice of roads, she was too distrustful of her own judgment to experiment. Sitting down on a boulder, she waited on the chance of hailing some passer-by. It was her 0 hour, when her independence appeared only the faculty to sign cheques drawn on money made by others, and her popularity but a dividend of the same cheques. I've been carried all my life, she thought, and even if someone comes, I'm the world's worst linguist. The description flattered her, but she had not the slightest claim to the title of linguist. Her ignorance of foreign languages was the result of her being finished at Paris and Dresden. During the time she was at school, she mixed exclusively with other English girls, while the natives who taught her acquired excellent English accents. This was her rendering of the line in the national anthem, "Send us victorious." Patriotism did not help her now, for she felt slightly doubtful when a thick-set, swarthy man wearing leather shorts and dirty-coloured braces swung up the pass. Among Iris's crowd was a youth who was clever at languages. From his knowledge of common roots, he had managed to use German as a kind of liaison language, but he had to draw on his imagination in order to interpret and be understood. Iris had a vivid recollection of how the crowd used to hoot with derision at his failures when she called out to the man in English and asked him to direct her to the village. He stared at her, shrugged, and shook his head. Her second attempt in a louder key met with no better success. The peasant, who seemed in a hurry, was passing on when Iris barred his way. She was acutely aware of her own impotence, as though she were some maimed creature whose tongue had been torn out. But she had to hold his attention to compel him to understand. Feeling that she had lapsed from the dignity of a rational being, she was forced to make pantomimic gestures, pointing to the alternative routes in turn, while she kept repeating the name of the village. He must get that, unless he's an idiot, she thought. The man seemed to grasp her drift, for he nodded several times, but instead of indicating any direction, he broke into an unfamiliar jargon. As Iris listened to the torrent of guttural sounds, her nerves snapped suddenly. She felt cut off from all human intercourse, as though a boundary line had been wiped out, and instead of being in Europe, she was stranded in a corner of Asia. Without money and without a common language, she could wander indefinitely. At that moment, she might be headed away from the village and into the wilds. The gorge had many tributary branches, like the windings of an inland sea. As she grew afraid, the peasant's face began to waver, like the illusion of some bad dream. She noticed that his skin glistened and that he had a slight goiter. Goitre, if anybody knows in the comments, let me know. But she was definitely conscious of his steamy, goatish smell, for he was sweating from his climb. "I can't understand you," she cried hysterically. "I can't understand one word. Stop! Oh, stop! You'll drive me mad." In his turn, the man heard only a string of gibberish. He saw a girl dressed like a man, who was unattractively skinny according to the local standard of beauty, with cut, dirty knees. She was a foreigner, although he did not know her nationality. Further, she was worked up to a pitch of excitement and was exceptionally stupid. She did not seem to grasp that she was telling him less than half the name of the village, whereas 3 different hamlets had the same prefix. He had explained this to her and asked for the full word. Iris could not have supplied it even if she had understood the man. The name of the village was such a tongue twister that she had never tried to disentangle it, but like the rest, had called it by its first 3 syllables. The position was stalemate. With a final grimace and shrug, the peasant went on his way, leaving Iris alone with the mountains. They overhung her like a concrete threat. She had bought picture postcards of them and broadcast them with the stereotyped comment, "Marvellous scenery." Once she'd even scrawled, "This is my room," and marked a peak with a derisive cross. Now the mountains were having their revenge. As she cowered under the projecting cliffs, she felt they had but to shake those towering brows to crush her to powder beneath an avalanche of boulders. They dwarfed her to insignificance. They blotted out her individuality. They extinguished her spirit. The spell was broken by the sound of English voices. Round the bend of the pass came the honeymoon couple from the hotel. This pair of lovers was respected even by the crowd for the completeness of their reserve and the splendour of their appearance. The man was tall, handsome, and of commanding carriage. His voice was authoritative. This word I find so difficult. Authoritative, and he held his head at an angle which suggested excessive pride. Waiters scampered at his nod, and the innkeeper, probably on the strength of his private sitting room, called him milord. His wife was almost as tall, with a perfect figure and a flawless face. She wore beautiful clothes which were entirely unsuitable for the wilds, but it was obvious that she dressed thus as a matter of course, and to please only her husband. They set their own standard and appeared unconscious of the other visitors, who accepted them as belonging to a higher social sphere. It was suspected that the name Todhunter, under which they had registered, was a fiction to preserve their anonymity. They passed Iris almost without notice. The man raised his hat vaguely, but his glance held no recognition. His wife never removed her violet eyes from the stony track, for her heels were perilously high. She was speaking in a low voice which was vehement in spite of its muffled tone. "No, darling, not another day, not even for you. We've stayed too—" Iris lost the rest of the sentence. She prepared to follow them at a discreet distance, for she had become acutely aware of her own wrecked appearance. The arrival of the honeymoon pair had restored her sense of values. Their presence was proof that the hotel was not far away, for they never walked any distance. At the knowledge, the mountains shrank back to camera subjects, while she was reconstructed from a lost entity to a London girl who was critical about the cut of her shorts. Very soon she recognised the original shrine whence she had deserted the pass. Limping painfully down the track, presently she caught the gleam of the darkening lake and the lights of the hotel shining through the green gloom. She began to think again of a hot bath and dinner as she remembered that she was both tired and hungry. But although apparently only the physical trace of her adventure remained, actually her sense of security had been assailed, as if the experience were a threat from the future, to reveal the horror of helplessness far away from all that was familiar. So once again, like the first chapter, Ethel Lina White kind of leaves it on this ominous term and just kind of foreshadowing what later happens, this idea of kind of Iris having to use her own wits, but then also needing support from others, but really kind of learning to test herself and what she can do and her abilities in a way she hasn't before. So yeah, I hope you like that. I find books such a great means of escape at this time, Ethel Lina White especially, because they're so gripping, and they really just, I've sometimes had up to 2 o'clock in the morning to finish them, of her books, and I like to reread them just because there's so many details you don't notice, so many references she makes, and so many funny points that you kind of only notice after a few times reading. So I hope you liked that. I hope it was kind of helpful in some way. I love reading, and I like the idea of being read to as well. I know it's something we tend to do with children, but I think we should do it more with adults. So yes, I've rambled on now for 25 minutes, so I will leave you to it. I hope you're safe and you're taking care of yourself and your family. And yeah, sending lots of virtual hugs and love. So I will speak to you soon, maybe tomorrow. We'll see how it goes, or maybe the weekend. I'm not sure. But yes, either way, look after yourselves. Bye, guys.